Hello and welcome to Focus on Liberia. My name is Dennis Jah and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. Tonight, our focus is on the history and culture of the Kru ethnic group. With me to discuss this is Professor Dr. K. Moses Nagbe, who's going to be joining us. Professor Nagbe is going to be joining us on the phone from the state of Maryland. Dr. Nagbe, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you so much, Jah, and I'd like to thank you all for the work you all are doing. And, I believe that every group, every individual has got to understand what makes up the life that he or she is living and the group is living. So this whole idea of focusing on cultural identity is very much important, and I appreciate that. I support that, and that is why I'm here.
Thank you so much, and that's the voice of Professor Dr. K. Moses Nagbe. If you attended the University of Liberia or live in Liberia, that name should be familiar. So Professor Nagbe is going to be joining us from the state of Maryland. Briefly about Professor Nagbe, he enjoys a wealth of interdisciplinary studies, including literature, law, education, business studies, health, literacy, and art. Give me a minute. All right. He studied in Africa and the United States of America. In Africa, he studied at the Southtown Government School, that's in Grand Creek County, the Sino High School in Sino County, the Modern Commercial Institute and the University of Liberia, and one of his professional schools, that is the Louis Arthur Graham School of Law. In America, Dr. Nagbe studied at the Glassboro, now the Rowan State University in North Central University. He holds a BA, an MA, an LLB, and a PhD, a humanities scholar. Dr. Nagbe has taught for 40 years. You heard me right, 40 years. At the grade school level in Liberia, he taught the College of West Africa and also Monrovia College. That's my alma mater. He's at the tertiary level. He taught the University of Liberia and also the Don Bosco, which is now the Stella Maria College. Dr. Nagbe presently teaches at the Prince George's Community College, also in America. He's a past president of the University of Liberia Faculty Association, that's ALFA, and past president of the Liberia Association of Writers Law. In the Liberian government, he served as Deputy Minister for Administration at the Ministry of Information and Legal Counsel and Deputy Minister for Legal Affairs at the Ministry of Transport. Dr. Nagbe has written considerably. His list of books that he's authored, at least 25. Among them are Nuggets of the African Novel, with notes on the Liberian literary heritage, In the Shadow of Worlds, Why I Write What I Write, Between the Caesars, Growing Up as an African Liberian, My Compatriot, Your Compatriot. He also wrote Eyes on the Hill. He wrote a short life story of Bishop E. Pele Sheman. Recently, Dr. Nagbe and Dr. Kofa co-author a short biography of the Kru ethnic group. Dr. Nagbe now resides in Maryland, the USA. Dr. Nagbe, that's a long one, but welcome to Focus on Liberia. We are honored to have you.
Thank you so much. Sometimes the list gets so long, I wish No bother with that, but just call my name and let's roll.
All right, let's do it. Give us just as a brief summary. We want to say just for a few minutes, tell us about the history and culture of the Kru ethnic group in few words.
Oh, that's a tall order.
I know.
Let me just say first that I've done 5 short books on Kru ethnic group, and so that within 50 minutes or so that we are working, much of what we've said in those books may not come out even with the question and answer period. So probably through this program, those who are interested in getting copies of the book or simply having some time to read through them can put in that request. So let me just spread my comments around as far as a 5 or 10 minute summary might take in. Like most African indigenous groups or cultural groups, we've all come from the cradle of civilization, which is from the Nile. And then coming to the heart of Africa, especially when you think about the 3 major West African kingdoms, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, you realize that the path of the Kru cultural group flowed from there. We came to be known, according to recorded history, when we arrived on the Green Coast in the 1500s. I'm talking about 1500s AD. So we worked our way through the Ivory Coast, and then we came all the way down the Putu mountain range, and then eventually we settled in the lower part of what is known today as West Africa. Our name, of course, in English, we talk about Kru, which is more of a misapplied name. Most of Kru people have been known as seafarers. They have been known as fishermen. They have been known as hunters. So as far as the seafaring is concerned, they travel on board a lot of ships and were simply referred to as the African Crew, CREW. And so over time, because a lot more European countries interacted with the Kru and the Kru interacted with them, that word Kru was spelled in a lot of different forms. And eventually, just as individuals grow, language does grow. And in that process, the name became KRU. But we know ourselves as Klao, KLAO, and sometimes it's KRAO, depending on what is called the accent clusters. For example, we have the Central Kru and Pygmies cluster that would spell it or call it KRAO. And when you talk about Southtown and a few other accent clusters, you have the word KLAO. So we know ourselves as Krao or Klao. We are of the large African family language group, which is called the Niger-Congo. And below the level of Niger-Congo, we have the Kwa, KWA. And the cultural cousins that we have making up the Kwa, we have, for instance, Grebo, we have Bassa, we have Pram. So they form that specific language group that is identified, for instance, in Liberia, which is the Kwa group. A few other things I will talk about. We talk about our religious practices, and we believe in one supreme being, but manifested in a number of things like rivers, trees, rocks, the sun, and all that. But again, our belief is in one supreme being. That is why when Christianity came to the land, people easily gravitated towards the religion that preached one supreme being. We also have what is called Ancestral Generation. Now, those who are not occurrent with that will think that we worship the dead. No, we don't worship the dead. And in fact, so many African cultural groups will tell you that they don't worship the dead, but they venerate them, they honor them, they honor their members and all that, and that is what they pay a lot more attention to. As far as economic practices are concerned, until money economy emerged in this part of the world, I'm talking about the African part of the world, we were into barter system. I'm sure many people are aware of what a barter system is, where you trade goods for goods. If I have cassava and you have fish, we settle on the price and we settle on the quantity, and you take what I gave you and I take what you gave me. As far as our political practices are concerned, we had two major levels. One, we had the lineage elders. Each lineage, we in the crew setting, we have about 12 of them, and each of them is ruled or guided by a lineage elder. And so to take care of an entire crew, Dakar, or nation, those 12 will come together, and there will be the first among equals. In other words, someone will be elected, and that person will be the Kroba. The Kroba is like talking about Klo, which is nation or town, and Ba. In other words, the individual who is a go-getter, the individual who is the voice of those people. That's what Kroba means. So we have lineage elders and chieftains, and the Kroba will be referred to as the chief, and he will be the superior fatherhead of the nation. And of course, below that, we have other people who kind of help strengthen the base of the hierarchy. We will have the Dejeyo, who happens to be a priest physician, and you will have multiples on them depending on the size of the nation. The early professions of the crew, basically farmers, hunters, fishermen, and as I said earlier, seafarers. I have three more things to say, and then we will get into the other aspects of this program. The natural traits, some of the natural traits of the crew people, they are independent-minded. They have a great sense of self-esteem. They are proud people, proud in terms of standing up for what they believe in and pursuing it to a logical end. The crew are also communal or family-oriented people. That is why you might find in one household a lot of people who might be cousins and great cousins and great cousins and all that. And if you, some of the people who have talked about the crew people, even some of their songs will say, you know, my mother would begin to link this one to the other one and the other one and the other one until I'm just out of breath and that sort of a thing. So we as communal people, we prize both extended and nuclear family connections. We are very adventurous, and I guess one of the things that would explain that is the fact that we have done a lot of seafaring. We have sailed ships and worked on factory floors and all that, and all these have been able to strengthen the adventurous nature of us. Then the last point I want to make as far as the natural traits are concerned, we love hot, spicy food. Hot, spicy food. Sometimes that is why others who want to be a little cynical will say that we eat a lot of pepper, and that is why we are hot-headed and that sort of thing. But anyway, that's part of the stereotypes.
Okay.
I have two more things to say, and then we will go. One, if you look at the recorded history of which is recorded Liberian history, it will be said, for instance, that many crew sailors helped in stealing some of our brothers and sisters who emigrated from America in the early 1800s to found a home in Africa. The crew sailors were very much helpful in bringing people either from the Sierra Leone area or from ships anchored as far as at sea. One other thing that we are known for is that we resisted alienation in the West African Republic of Liberia. We resisted marginalization in national politics. And so there is a series of wars that we fought in terms of making sure that the central government, which was for a long time controlled by the settler Liberians, we had a series of wars with them. And the last thing is that if you think about the crew of cultural groups, there are a few names, and it's just a short list I'm giving. People who think about the crew people, they think about Senior Joanimene, who was the chief at the time. The last major crew cultural war was fought with central government, Senior Joanimene, in 1931. We also hear about Dido Twe, one of a strong voice for not only advocating the cause of the crew cultural group, but also advocating for the need for integration, so that just as the settler Liberian who enjoy the benefits of the country, indigenous Liberians will also enjoy that. And the last individual, like Nagbe Wallo. Wallo was the first African. Wallo was the first African to graduate Harvard University, first Liberian and the first African to have accomplished that feat. And there are several others. The last I probably want to talk about is Dr. Joseph and Nagbe, Joseph Nagbe Tuba, Dr. Tuba, who happened to have been Liberia's representative to write the charter of the World Health Organization, WHO. In fact, he was the first public health officer in Liberia. So I'll stop here. Like I said,
right.
There isn't much that can be said or done in 50 or so minutes, but that hopefully is the set of highlights of our people.
All right. And one of those crew persons too is Dr. K. Moses Nagbe, who's on the show tonight. Dr. Nagbe,
well,
we have crew people in a number of counties. Tell me about those counties and what are some of the subgroup of the Kru overall Kru ethnic group.
Okay. We have, of course, Grand Kru County and Sino County as the principal counties where you will find a lot of Kru ethnics. And then we have Maryland, Grand Jeddah, Grand Bassa, and Riverside, where other Kru ethnics have been sprinkled.
Let's talk about the subgroups. I know there are other groups within the Kru ethnic group.
The subgroups are very many, and as I said earlier in our programs here, it will take a lot of time to read out all their names, but the subgroups, the subpopulations are at least 30, at least 30. And you will keep in mind that we have others along the coastal belt, and we have others along the inland belt. So if you were taking, for instance, we talk about Kabul, which is Sanquin in English. We have Glokli, we have Wete, we have Nagbe, we have Nuan, we have Nyembala, Wiaklo, Sobo, Tubakli, Chanakale, Nifa. And then we have Briu, Kao, Pete, Sobo, Wisepo. You see what I'm going there?
Right.
So there are many, and the list is rather long. Some also include Tolo, Tro, Menier, Greo, Niplepo, Tatwe, Siton, Bu, Wooly, Tajweson, Leon, and you go on, and then you get to Jirao, which is Passing and all of that. So there are many, as I said, and,
right. And what
someone who is, go ahead.
What are some of the cultural or linguistic similarities and differences among those groups?
Yes, the thing about it is that to be able to understand that part very well, one would think about the accent clusters. I call them accent clusters. In other words, when you move from, there's about 6 of such accent clusters. You, for instance, you have the accent cluster, which includes Setra Kru, Pygmy Set, and Jlov. Those who form one part, and then you have Gilao or Sastan cluster, and then you have the Granses and Pole River cluster. So to understand how these people relate, at least linguistically, you have to think about the accent clusters, and with those accent clusters, you have a list of subpopulations under them. So that is why it is very much important for people to understand that, for instance, even though I speak the what you call Kru language, I am specifically capable of speaking the Sassoon accent cluster of the Kru language.
I know there are some Kru people outside the country, outside Liberia, that have settlements. Where are other Kru from in Africa and other parts?
All right. For instance, close to us there, we have Sierra Leone. In fact, Sierra Leone became one of the first key large communities of the Kru people. And from there, because for some time, those Kru that arrived in Liberia were kind of suppressed economically. Some of them migrated to Sierra Leone. And in fact, the British government kind of created a very good ambience for them to move out there, and from there they will get on board ships and travel all around the world. So in Africa, we have Sierra Leone, we have Ivory Coast, La Côte d'Ivoire, we have Ghana, we have Nigeria. And if you remember that in the 1920s, towards the end of the 1920s, where the Fernando crisis got into play, where the ruling group was charged with slavery and forced labor, these people were taken to Fernando. So over time, there are people you can find, crew people you can find in Fernando, now Equatorial Guinea or Guinea-Bissau. You also will find a good number of crew people in Angola.
Wow.
You will find, yes, wherever ships travel, keep in mind that a number of crew people will be found there, particularly because it is said that they were very, very hard working, and therefore many ships wanted them on board them to get wherever they wanted to go. So you have Angola, you have South Africa. Just quickly, there was a crew colleague of mine, I think one Richard Clark. He told me a story about how he went to Tanzania on a teacher-related seminar. And this night he went into a club, and lo and behold, it was a club that was owned by a crew fellow. And he said he was very much entertained. Talking about Richard Clark. I cannot talk about Great Britain because that was another solid place. To this day, you have a lot of crew. You have a huge community in Liverpool and then Manchester. So short of the long is wherever ships sailed around the Cape of Good Hope and what have you, people eventually became part of those countries and those societies.
Right. So all the crews that are outside Liberia, did they migrate from Liberia or?
A lot of them, especially from Liberia, they established a huge community in Sierra Leone, and then from there ships took them here and there. It would be an interesting thing one of these days to be able to do much of the linkages. But one thing I do know is that, especially in South Africa, when a lot of the crewmen who took to sea began to sail around the world, especially during World War I and World War II, they were taken on as Royal Marines. They were part of Royal Marines. And that culture led to name change because a lot of the ships that took them wanted to ensure that they took on British names and all that kind of a thing. Therefore, it is possible, for instance, if you're in South Africa, if you are in Angola and what have you, you probably might be sitting by a crew fellow, but given the fact of name change, you will not notice that, except that crew pride swells up in him and he begins to tell you something about the fact that he is a crew or he's got a crew family and all that.
All right. You touched on this briefly about the power structure or the structure of governance among the crew people, especially in the early days.
Yes.
Please expand a little bit more on how the crew people govern themselves.
Okay. At the unit level, you talk about the family, and that's the nuclear family, and of course, eventually you talk about the extended family. Now, each DACO was set up according to lineage groups. It's more like a zonal type of thing.
Okay.
And each lineage group called Panton, the plural is Panten. Each lineage group would have the Panton elder, others would call it Panton Nyefwe, okay, big person of the Panton. And it is at that level, when you become Phantom B or Phantom Influence, that eventually you are eligible to become part of the Chief's Council. And it was from the council that there will be elected that one who will be the first among equals to become the superior father head of the nation. So you have, at the top you have the lineage elders, then you have below that heads of households and all that.
So is that, how far does that Pantonyefwe authority goes?
In terms of drawing, people talk about democracy and all that kind of thing. You have to keep in mind that people were also interested in democratic concepts and interaction. So if there was a major issue to deal with, the council of the chief and his council would let the information filter down to the Pantonyefwe and then flow also down to the house. And the information that would flow down would then, of course, flow up, but it was always a two-way type of thing to make sure that people gather consensus before they arrive at a particular decision.
Now, let me ask you about religion among the Kru people, especially in the early days. I know most of them were non-Christians.
Christianity came towards the mid to the latter part of the 1800s, except those who traveled out had some ideas about it, but as far as a serious practice, it came later on. But the early practices had to do with oracular experiences. In other words, there was, for instance, a good part of our people there, we had Kujraple, and then we had Feinto, and then we had Keise. So Kujraple, Keise, and Feinto, those were the oracles that our people pay great homage to. But in addition to that was the ancestral veneration that I talked about earlier. Above all of that, people believe that there was one supreme being who had his emissaries, who had regulation to other natural forces, rivers, trees, and all that.
So what is this Kuchlople? Is that like they went to the mountains to worship, or how?
Yes. Kuchlople was a supreme force believed to have been an emissary of a supreme being, and there was a place called Bobogire. Bobogire happens to be, in English, we talk about Putu Range, that cluster of mountains out there. So they would take about a month or so to travel there and pay pilgrimage. Some went in request for children. In other words, some were barren and they went there to kind of get gifts from Kujope to be able to have children. Some went with other infirmities, epilepsies and all that, and they went there and paid their supplications and all that, and eventually they were given healing. So the place that they traveled was Bobogire.
Stories of Bobogire and Kuchlople are all stories of the Southeast. So I believe this was not just a Kru ethnic group thing.
This is true. This is true. And that is why we talk about the Kwa group, for instance. Yes, this is true. Obviously, the thing about religion, sometimes, if we understand very well, cannot be handled and bottled up and kept by one person or one group. So indeed, this is the side of the Kru cultural group that I'm talking about. Yes, the Gribbles went there, and some other ethnics went there, and all that.
Okay, let's talk about the coming and the settlers and their relationship with the Kru people. I know I was talking when I was preparing for this show. I spoke to one Kru elder and said, well, in Liberia they say Kru people are hard-headed because number one, they refuse to accept the settlers, and number two, they refuse to be slaves, to be taken during the transatlantic slavery. Talk to me about the Kru people, transatlantic slavery, and the fight with the free slaves coming back to Liberia.
Okay, the thing about it is, I think it's misunderstanding when people talk about the fact that the Kru did not like the repatriated Africans. The key point of contention was that, remember now that the Kru people were seafarers, and seafaring was a source of income. So when the settlers went to that part of Africa, they wanted to get the Kru off the market, the seafaring market, and that was the point of contention. So it's not the matter that, because as I said earlier, some of the Kru people from the Sierra Leone end, where the repatriated Africans started coming in before they came to look for land in this place called Liberia today. It was a lot of Kru people who sailed them to that point through canoes and all that kind of thing. So they couldn't have been people who hated the repatriated Africans. They helped them out, but when they wanted to kind of cut their source of income, that was where the tension came in. You talk about the Franklin War of 1910 and even Cestus and all those 1916 and down until you get to 1931. It was about taxes. It was about cutting off those people. And of course, this is human thing. You cannot sit supinely where someone comes to take your bread and butter from you. It becomes a problem. And about the Atlantic slave trade, yes, indeed. Even though we would say that some of the Kru people were enslaved, but it was not to the extent that it did other cultural groups. There was often a mark, a long cicatricized mark just from the forehead all the way to the ridge of the nose that was darkened, so that anyone who saw a Liberian or saw that person, the Kru person, would rather avoid capturing him, because the Kru men would prefer to commit suicide than to be enslaved. So earlier on, I talked about the fact that we are proud people. We have a great sense of self-esteem and what have you. And so to get subjugated, you had to be a man enough, you had to be a human being enough to subjugate or enslave the Kru man.
If you are just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia, and we are discussing the history and culture of the Klao or Kru ethnic group. Our guest tonight is Professor Dr. K. Moses Nagbe. He's joining us via audio from the state of Maryland. Dr. Nagbe, the Kru language, does it have a written form?
Yes, it has a written form, but there is need to standardize that written form. Religious groups, the Catholics and then the Methodists have been strong in kind of supporting the literacy programs of the Kru people. But like I said, in fact, there is a set of Bibles that have been written in Kru, and some of us who did Kru literacy training have had to kind of begin writing the language as well. So one key thing that one needs to think about is how to consolidate or standardize the the Kru literate script so that a lot more people will not only read literature of the Kru people in religious setting, but also get that program into a secular part of our world. But yes, indeed, to come back to your point, yes, there are written scripts of the Kru language.
Yeah, let's get to, first of all, when I was preparing for this interview, I bought the book, The Kru, a short biography written by Dr. Nagbe and also Dr. Maurice T. Kofa. And I'm going through this book. One of the things, because what we have here, to have not many ethnic groups have a history of the ethnic group. I think there is one, my ethnic group. Now I'm reading the one for the Kru ethnic group. And I think the reason why you think these things have been kind of suppressed in your book. I don't remember the line now.
The thing about it is that, you know, when we have to accept the fact that the Republic of Liberia, the founding of the Republic of Liberia was done by the repatriated Africans, often called settlers and all that. And since in their world, there hadn't been much in terms of strengthening the African roots, when they came, they arrived on the Green Coast, they professed Western culture and Western ideas. And since they were the founders of the nation state called Liberia, they did not want to have a lot of diverse ideas and diverse practices. And so they stuck with the Western orientation. And so if you wanted to be a solid part of the Republic of Liberia, you had to profess all things Western. And in that process, one can understand why cultural group identities were suppressed, and we stuck with this Western orientation. As a matter of fact, I'm sure we all are aware of Tubman and his unification and integration policy. That was the line that others told, and when he came in, he thought to toe the line. There were days or there were years in which to speak an indigenous language was more like a crime. Right. I'm just being superlative here, but in the home, you had to speak English, and if you didn't speak English, of course, you had a problem. And some of us who today can speak both English and an indigenous language have to really celebrate our parents, because even though my father completed the University of Liberia, he did not stay in Monrovia. He went back to his hometown, and through that process, some of us growing up there were able to acquire the local language as well as English. So given this particular context, you find out that the various cultural groups, indigenous cultural groups, were not given the opportunity to be able to assert their own African roots. One of the things that's been the outcome of that suppression is that even at the University of Liberia, to this day, no one can talk about a degree earned in the area of Liberian studies, a degree in any of our cultural groups. I mean, degrees focused on any of our cultural groups, which is a sad thing. I would hope that as time goes on, there will be a change for the better.
And if we have time at the end of the broadcast, we're going to talk about what can be done. And that's why some of these things are part of our program here at Focus on Liberia. But let's talk about marriage, courtship in the Kru ethnic group. What's the process?
Okay, the process originally began at a very early age. Sometimes a young person, a child, say about even 1 or 2 years old, will have the parents engage someone for him. The same thing about the girls. So what often happens is that if the child was much younger, so that he or she would not make his or own decisions, the parents began the process. The parents began the process by offering little gifts here and there. And eventually, when those two came of age, then definitely the process will be stepped up, and the man will work a little for the family of the bride, and over time, the bride price will be paid. And let me just emphasize as far as bride price. Bride price, on the contrary, is not buying the woman.
Okay.
Bride price is not buying the woman. Bride price is celebrating the parents for how far they brought the woman to become a bride to go into a different home. So, moving forward, whenever the time came for these people to kind of consummate whatever process that was begun, the lineage elders will come, the community elders will come, and then the bride price and everything would be kind of brought in the open. And after that, there will be what you call cultural blessings will be poured on the couple, and then eventually they will get to their home, a home that will have been built by the peers and elders of the groom.
What would a wedding look like? If there's, or is there a wedding?
Yeah, well, the thing about it is that, of course, there will be festivities. There will be drumming, there will be food prepared and all that, and eventually there will be several large pans, both by elders, divided along the line of elders, divided along the line of gender, where they will have a communal meal, each going into the same pan or going into the same pot and taking a mouthful of whatever food that was kept in there. But the short of the long is that it began with the meeting of the minds between both parents, and the parents of the groom and the bride, and over time, it was consummated. The agreement was consummated, and there was this festivity, and then eventually after that, the groom and the bride moved into their own home. But let me also add that gradually things changed. Instead of maybe 5, 6, or 7 years it would take for this whole process to kind of mature. When people started traveling here and there, the process was shortened, and every other thing, I guess, became messed up.
All right. In your book, you spoke about, because that same person who's married can also take on as many wives as he wants.
Yes. Go ahead.
Issue of polygamy and why. Talk to me about that in my audience.
Yes. There was much of agrarian type of life. In other words, people stuck to the land and harvesting the land. And the more wives you had, the better it was in terms of economics and, in fact, in terms of politics. Obviously, you have more wives, you have more children. And it was important for that to happen because in those days, the health realities were dismal. People die young and die of petty illnesses that could be taken care of. But at that time, that wasn't happening. So if a woman you imagine that if you had just one woman and you had 3, 4 children, and some health epidemic went and killed off 2 or 3. You know what that would mean? So people had this practice of polygyny to be able to have a good pool of children to work on farms and also to help do other things in and around their home.
All right. And in your book, you also said that if a man has one wife and that wife goes away, that can cause marital depression, sometimes even suicide.
Of course. You know, there are people who are having one wife. There are people who would go into depression and even kill themselves because that one wife they had and they've gotten used to a kind of suddenly left home or died. So if you had multiple wives, even though you grieve over the passing of this one or you grieve over the woman leaving home, that depression will not be equal to what it would be if you had just one wife in the home.
Again, if you are just joining us, we are focusing on the history and culture of the Kru ethnic group. My guest tonight is Dr. K. Moses Nagbe. If you want to join us, please post your comments on Facebook, or you can call 678-263-8804. Again, the number is 678-263-8804. Dr. Nagbe, let's talk about schooling or education in the Kru ethnic group, especially during the early days before coming to the Western education. How did Kru people learn?
We learn through what is called apprenticeship or experiential learning. The boys, in fact, there were 2 groups. You had what is called Kafa. Kafa will take in early teens to late teens, and you had Bo. This will go from 20, 21 or so all the way to 35. It was often a training ground for young men. Besides that, you had the elders of the lineage groups teaching the younger people the trades of the culture, those to go into hunting, those to go into fishing, all that. And as far as the women were concerned, they too came under the tutelage of the older women who taught them art and craft and all that. Our system was not that of, for instance, talking about color or talking about sandy. So we had a apprenticeship, which is called.
So unlike other ethnic groups in northern Liberia, the Kru does not have Koro and Sunday. What do they have?
No, we don't have. No, we do. I talked about Bo, and we talk about I talk about Kafa, especially for the men. But as far as the women were concerned, they were taught by the elders of the community and elders of the lineage groups. So we don't have, except of course, later on, some people began to talk about like Gregory Bush and all the kind. We originally we didn't have anything of that nature. We learned by doing, and that learning by doing was kind of supervised by the elders. We had also something called mentor and mentee. You talk about Bunabi. Bunabi will be the mentor, and Bunaji will be the mentee. So over time, a man who wanted to have some young person come under his tutelage will go to the parents and say, your son is a very obedient fellow. Your son is a very strong person. I like him to be my mentee. And then, of course, the parents will feel honored to do that. And through that, that mentor would teach the young person whatever skill or skills the mentor had.
How do Kru people name their children? What's the naming convention?
Oh, it is normally done by the father, with sometimes the whispering of the wife, because the wife was not left out of it, but it was seen as an honor for the man to do the naming of the children. And children were named either to commemorate the long departed relatives, or they will give them philosophical names, which one would call proverbial names. In other words, names with a certain meaning and all that. You talk about Monsieur, someone is called Monsieur. In other words, I am triumphant. You know, I've come to a level of being a victor in whatever thing that I have done. The other names might be Betty, which is something like this guy often pursues whatever he wants, and or this guy will pursue whatever he wants and eventually get it. So you talk about Henry. You normally do not hold onto something and leave it so easily. And you have Tennessee and all those. So you have names that are used to commemorate relatives, either living or long gone, names that have philosophical punchlines to them, and names that probably tend to kind of commemorate historical events and all that. In one of I told you something about in one of my books, this book, which is focused on celebrating the life of E. Philip Sherman. I have 42 names of from the crew cultural group, and several other places that I've written about the crew.
Talk to me about the role of women. Is and I think you discussed some of these things in the book about the crew people.
You see, the people outside of certain cultures, it's unfortunate that they think they know so much about the culture and want to make serious commentaries. In the crew culture, women, and I'm sure it's in quite a number of African cultural groups, the women have soft power. Receptive. In other words, in the home, the woman is pillar. That is why no man so easily made decisions without consulting with the woman. Even in controversial issues in any of the crowd backup, whenever things got tough, when men discussed and could not come to a final decision, they were told to go home to consult their pillars as well as their pillows. The women were the pillars at home, the strong bone and everything at home. And nothing so easily came to fruition, nothing so easily came to an end without women being incorporated in the decision-making process. When it came to farming, for instance, the men were the ones who cleared the plot of land, and the women went in to plant the land. Everything about division of labor was very much important in the home. So the women, contrary to what others think, were not subjugated. They had their part to play, and the men allowed them to play those parts very well.
Good. Let's go to literature and see about let's discuss about crew literature. There's some crew legends, some crew proverbs, some crew parables that you can share with us.
In a book that I celebrate my people, I have 50 proverbs in there. So you have, as far as the literature is concerned, you talk about the whole thing about oral literature, which is folklore. And you will find proverbs, you will find riddles, you will find folk tales. One folk tale that virtually cuts across the crowd, Dakar, is the story about a little raptor. It is our version of Anansi the spider, as well as Brer Rabbit in Caribbean world and what have you. So if you don't, I probably you two might know Dunno. We are Dunno.
Right.
Yeah, Dunno is a very raptor character who appears in a series of folk tales, how he gets into trouble and he easily gets out of trouble, or not so easily gets out of trouble and all of that. As far as the issue of legends are concerned, I think from one sector of the crew, cultural group to the other, you might find various shades of legends, which may not have characters. I remember from my end of the crew, cultural group, we have Jiri Weto. Weto was a version of our Samson. He was a child acquired from Kudraple, and he was groomed, and for a number of years, he was a strong arm of defense of the that sector of the crew people until, through the treachery of a woman, he was killed, because no one was supposed to know how he would die. But when this woman came in and wanted to be his wife, he took in the woman, and through bad talk over some time, he was able to divulge what would easily kill him. And so once the woman got it, because the woman came from an enemy group, of course she disguised herself so no one knew that. And eventually, when she got the information, talk about intelligence and espionage, she got the information and left. And in a few months, war drums were sounding again. And when the war came, she divulged the information to prepare themselves, and were able to kill this guy, Jiri Weto.
Wow. Okay, Professor Nagbe, we have a caller on the line.
Yeah.
Caller, your name and where you're calling from.
This is from Middle Boy, Mr. Jack Kiataba, New York.
Kiataba from New York. Welcome to Focus on Liberia. Your question or comments, please.
Okay. You want my comments now?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I entered late. I didn't listen to a professor. I didn't listen to a story or a presentation. But I commend the organizer of the program about crew people, crew history, from what I learned for the flyer. I didn't really talk much about the details, but my commentary is to commend, is to give my appreciation to this very important history of the crew people to be awakened.
Thank you.
On our professor and learning people. That's my first comment.
Thank you.
In the first place, in my opinion, there'll be a lot of work. If it is just starting, there'll be a lot of work to be done. And there are a lot of research work to be done on this crew history. Why am I putting that crew history? Because the new generation would like to know the population of crew people, not me, the consumers will have to know the population and different background of the ethnic crew people. I think money have to be raised, and people who are professors very good. He's a writer, you know what he's doing. There are different kind of crew setters have to be reached so that they will give their story. I know some people say alive. They give their story, a different background, so that it will be a unified story. I can sit down and just imagine to write something, but I don't know what happened in South. I don't know what happened in Sino. The Riverside crew, what happened to them? How they migrated there in the 19th century or 18th century, wherever. So, what can crew go to Ghana? What can crew go to Sierra Leone? What can crew go to Africa? And even London, Liverpool. So, there are a lot of work. I'm saying it to say that I'm not making this comment as a vague comment. A professor from Florida University wrote a book on the evolution of the daily conflict in Liberia. I was given this book, and it goes in details. Even the interview Sawyer in that book, and other professor, and we done. So I am saying that my commentary, I think a lot of you coming here are lying. But what I'm trying to say here is that I think the job of the crew history is beginning. So my commentary and my appreciation go to the professor who have the ideology with other teams, including you yourself. But there's a lot of work ahead to be done.
Great.
There's a lot of work to be done.
Right.
So that's my commentary. In my little weak way, if you want me to be part of that, or the organizer want me to be part of that, I will be willing to be part of that. I know that the availability of grant, there's a grant all over that the student can make research. The reason why I'm so much interested in that, I am a veteran of 19th century or even 18th century. My grandfather was buried alive with thousands of people in Sano County, in Sanque.
Why was that?
Because they so.
Why was your great-grandfather buried alive? And sorry to hear that.
All right. Very good. The reason why my grandfather, they were rejecting the free slave to be migrated and settled in Sano County. I repeat, in the 19th century, my grandfather and a considerable number of people were buried alive in Sanque, what they call, in the Kru dialect, they call it Bokri, in Sanque, Bafubea. Because they was rejecting for free slaves to be migrated and integrated in Sano County, in the Kru country, what they call Green Coast. That was not Sano, they call Green Coast. So, prior to this, they were fooled that there was peace accord. That war, that history has taken place long before the Sasanian War. But it is not on book. It is not written.
Okay.
But we are aware of that. By
the grace of God, we can get all these written down so we can have our history complete. But
thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tabla. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Nagbe?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Any idea on the war that the caller is talking about, where his grandfather, he said, was buried?
There's been series of such wars. I know of an incident in February of 1917. This episode appears in a book by one Edmund Hogan, Hogan. The book came out in 1981. In that book, in February of 1917, a number of chiefs had gotten into an agreement as a result of the War of 1910. And they signed what was called the Nana Crew Agreement. When the chiefs were invited to Greenville, not knowing the act was to eliminate as many of those chiefs who had been resisting control. Remember, I told you that one of the contentious points, in fact, the key contentious point, was that of depriving the people of seafaring. They wanted to make sure that the national leaders wanted to set a policy that will ensure that whatever taxes and levies that came through shipping will come to central government and leave the people out. And if the people wanted to do their independent negotiation to get on board these ships, that independent negotiation was kind of abruptly canceled. And this led to disgruntlement and the people fought. So they wrote this Nana Crew Agreement. And when the people appeared in Grayville, Sino County, in February of 1917, 45 chiefs were hanged on that very day. 45 chiefs were hanged on that very day.
By the
and
government,
you find,
the government of Liberia.
Yes. You have those things replicated. And let me just add this. Whenever people, the stage Liberia has reached, whenever people discuss these historical events, it is not to stir anger, but it is there to ensure that those events that led to such heinous acts, people should be aware of them and strive as much as possible never to repeat them. We have to know the history. People know about World War I, people know about World War II, not so much of stirring another strife, but to be on the guide so that people do not wallow in such very wicked actions and acts. So yes, the guy is right. Such events took place in Liberia, and his point regarding bringing up a lot of historical points. Every cultural group will probably need to have several volumes of its own history. Right. So you have volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, that sort of a thing. So indeed, yes, it is important that we codify the history. The more we understand why things went on the way they did, then we can kind of decide never to go back to those kind of actions that will lead to very wicked, repercussions and all that.
Let's talk about some crude dishes. I know crude or pepper.
Well, our big thing is palm butter. Others will call it palm soup. The context to that is that our people believe that we were somewhere in an unknown territory, like you talk about falling from heaven and all that. And when a child comes to life, when a child comes into this world, it is believed that that child is in this world in pursuit of palm butter. So people, the crew ethnic love palm butter so much. In rural areas, for instance, someone might consume palm butter seven days a week, for their love of palm butter. So palm butter with dry meat and dry fish and all that, and with very hot sauce too. Of course, sometimes some of these things get to be so stereotypical because for me, for instance, I don't cook pepper. In days gone back, I used to eat a lot of pepper, but nowadays I do not. And it's got nothing to do with stomach ulcer and that sort of thing. It's just that pepper doesn't treat me well these days.
All right. There's a question here from Banendo on Facebook. He says, Professor, how do you explain the huge early presence of crews in Monrovia and the communities they established, including New Crew Town and others? Why so many Crew people around Monrovia?
Yeah, the thing about it is that whole place, which is called Monrovia now, that whole place was the thoroughfare of the Crew people. In other words, people were going up and down the coast. And as life became very interesting and dynamic people-based communities in this place and that place. That's how you have a huge community of Kru people in Cape Mount. You have Robertsport, have huge communities of Kru people in Riverfest, Brazza, and all that. So every human being, we all know, every human being loves life. And where the life is so exciting, so dramatic, so diverse, people, it becomes a polling station. I gave you an example of a place called Central Kru, where there was a time that it was more of a trade center. And because it was a trade center, obviously, a lot of good things and, of course, probably bad things were happening over there, and people wanted to be part of the action. And therefore, they came from their villages and towns and kind of congregated there. So was it within the context of the Kru people you talk about, West when you talk about New Kuta. That is how such places were settled. We know that there was a major Kru community which eventually became Old Kru Town, because over time, some of the people, when the huge bridge, the old bridge was built, people went on the other side and gradually moving towards a central point, they created New Kru Town as a result of that. And then when these people went, traveled on boat ships and they came back, they settled over there, and that's how the communities grew. So life, drama of life, excitement, and all those things brought people together. Eventually, they wanted to taste of city life and urban life, that is.
Dr. Samuel Ngovo is asking on Facebook, and I think you touched on this earlier, but here's what he's saying. In northwestern Liberia, the Bandi and other ethnic groups depend on the Poro and the Sunday societies to impart knowledge of traditions to younger generations to prepare them for roles as husbands and wives. Institutions prepare young boys and girls for the future role in society. How are the Kru people different from other Kwa-speaking people like Grebo and Crown?
Well, one, as far as the matter of education is concerned, as I said earlier, the general system was more of apprenticeship or experiential learning, hands-on type of learning. And for other specific aspects, you had, as I said, the Kapa and the Bo that often train boys to be men and men to be elders and all that. As far as the women component is concerned, the women were brought under the tutelage of older women to kind of guide them in the process. So we didn't have what you have as institutionalized learning, where you talk about the Poro and you talk about the Sandy. It wasn't anything of that nature. As far as how the various, I call them cultural cousins, like the Grebo, the Brazza, and the Crown are concerned. One is more of the distinct language pattern, but basically, as far as dietary habits and all those are concerned, there is a remote link. That is what places that group in the same language group, which is the Kwa group. You talk about Grebo, you talk about Brazza, and what have you. But they have, for instance, a Brazza might be talking about Don Boy and say Buik. Of course, in some of the sub-populations of the Kru, you have them talk about Tupai. And then you talk about palm butter. The Brazza person is likely to call it Benny. And other Grebo sub-populations might call it Hana, which is palm butter. So by the time you are leaving the Kru and you get into their cultural cousins, then there is a huge stock of vocabulary that will distinguish them from their crew cousins and all that. But sometimes even the calling of one or two items, for instance, water we call it ni, in the other they might call it ni, So when you move from one cultural cousin to the other, then the stock of vocabulary becomes the distinguishing mark, as opposed to the intra-ethnic group, like the crew, where there might be a few stock of words based on environment that may be different. But a huge stock of words would be the same in the intra-cultural group.
I was about to ask you a question on the crew music, but there's a question here from Dave Jha on Facebook. It says, "Thank you so much, Professor. Please describe the relationship of the Klau ethnic group to other neighboring tribes or ethnic groups in the past and present. What has become of the crew music that there is no tapped Liberian musician making use of the crew language?"
No, but one can say no. Maybe few people are tapping into that, because anyone who is familiar with the 1970s will know that Tijadru, Anthony Nagbe was a very strong voice in terms of the crowd music that he brought to the various demonstrations and various meetings of people engaged in political activism and all that. Of the music, and in terms of how people were related, through intermarriage and through attending schools and all that, that integration came about. But again, those who were fortunate enough to be able to speak their indigenous languages were able to draw a distinction of where they kind of related and where they differ in their relationships.
So what are some of the crew music that you enjoy? And what are
you find the crewmen singing during farming.
Right.
You see the crewmen singing during harvesting. You will hear the crewman singing as he went to sea and came from sea. So I was privileged to being able to do farming, and so I know several farming songs, and even minding right birds. There were always songs, and to talk about which ones I like the ones that really stir the spirit of work in me. And so whenever there was farming and I had my machete or I had my cutlass and I had my hook to be able to clear the bushes and just charge on, don't get me started, really. Don't get me started.
Okay, one final question before I ask you for your final comments. What are the games, some of the games that you will play, some of the sporting activities of the crew culture?
Yes, one type which is called string and straw, we call it blade. String and straw. You kind of get a string and tie it, and then you have 3, 4, 5 people around a sandy patch, and the test of will was being able to hide that loop of a string so that other people will not find it using their straws, but you will find it. And that is where younger ones who were so mischievous and cheeky, that is where their older ones often beat them like nobody's business. If the game went around and one person could not identify his or her looped string, definitely that person was placed in the center of the group and had an outstretched palm into which every other person would drum, whether it is the heel or whether a fist drum that into the palm of the individual. There was another, so we have a straw and string. There's another one where you practice the snapping of kernels. You have as many kernels that you snap, the better you were at that game. And again, if you did not snap all your kernels, eventually you lost out on the game and you got beaten for that. Yes. So, and then when you move, then there was another one which was often played by the older ones. In Egypt, they have it as Makala, M-A-N-K, C-A-L-A. You had these beads that were placed in a set of rows of, they normally dug out a wooden piece, and that dug out piece had about 6 or 12 holes. And the challenge was to be able to drop the seeds, all the seeds from one hole to maybe the last hole. And if you did that successfully, you were acclaimed as the winner of that. With us, it's called plaque, K-P-A-L-A, K-P-A. Yeah, so plaque, and became that. And as you move from one setting to the other, you always have those little games to play. And then there was chasing, where you have one team of boys and another team of boys, and the challenge was to be able to catch as many members in the opposite team as opposed to the other. And then you had wrestling matches.
Yeah.
You had wrestling matches. And then you had top spinning, T-O-P. If you spawn a top, there will be two teams match again. You have the top and you have a stick with a string at the end. And the challenge was to be able to let that top fly as many miles as possible or as many yards as possible. And those who did that very well, again, were often declared the winners. So you have straw and string. You have this Makala type of game. You have wrestling matches, and you even had what is called bark and nails. Bark and nails. You had we call it takwe. Bark and nails. You cut a fresh bark of a banana tree, and you had several of them buried under some patch of sand, and the challenge was to use a nail or use a strong stick to be able to penetrate as many of those nicely cut barks under the sand. And if you did that successfully, if your team did that successfully, you also won the game.
Right. I'm looking forward to the day when those are on YouTube so we can see them.
Yes. In fact, that is why, I began this, my comment with thanking you and your team for what you are doing. The brother Taba was talking about we have a long way to go. Yes, we have a long way to go. The long way to go begins with the shorter way to go. So you start off and eventually it builds on. So what we are doing, sensitizing people about their cultural roots and all that is very much important. Over time, a lot of these things are going to be written about and even dramatized so that the new generation of various cultural groups will see the significance of knowing and understanding your cultural roots.
Thank you very much, Professor Nagbe, and thanks to those that are on Facebook and listening to us and watching. Before we end, I just want to hear your final comments. And once again, thank you for the book. I have a copy. That's The Crew. And something that is happening, I hope other ethnic group will follow suit so that we can have more of these. We also have Dr. Burroughs' book, which is Between the Kola Forest and the Salted Sea. That's about the Liberian history before the settlers. We also have a civics book that was written by Atiya Solution. That's mine. Cognition. So the Republic of Liberia. So these are all steps in getting Liberian history, our Liberian culture in the hands of the people. Your final comment, sir?
Yes, there are two parts to it. The first part is it is very much important for us to understand ourselves. Each individual, each group needs to understand the various energies, the various voices that brought any such group to being. So understanding your root is very much important. There are others who do not have the opportunity to have acquired knowledge about the root. They should not be fair. Wherever life meets them now, they need to work so hard to be able to understand the basic things about their various roots. The second thing I want to talk about is that understanding the history of a nation or understanding the history of the world should not be a source of bitterness or should not get other people to think that they simply want to rehash things that have gone before they themselves came to life. Understanding history will ensure that even if there are others who want to repeat that history, there will be some other people who will provide the guidance to ensure that history does not repeat itself. And so knowing about our roots and knowing about our history will kind of ensure that we take a path that will eventually bring peace and not discord. And the third thing is that those of you who through the media and other establishments are making an impact, you should be given all the support, whether moral, financial, whatever it is. And please continue to work because that is also part of national development and nobody should underestimate that.
Thank you so much, Professor Nagbe. You were talking about Mancala. I have a psychologist, Dave Jassy, beautiful. He said he used Mancala working with his kids in therapy.
Yes.
But he didn't realize that it was a crude invention.
Yes, that was a solid part of our crew. In villages along the coast and even towns, you find older people, especially there's a Mancala version. It was mainly old people who played that. I'm talking about those in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. They will sit by and play that version of Mancala.
So, Professor, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Want to appreciate those of you who are watching us on Facebook. Continue to support us. I want to also announce here that Focus on Liberia is extending to Liberia. We are trying to establish the Focus on Liberia Club in all Liberian high schools. And what we're going to be concentrating on specifically will be Liberian history, Liberian civics, and also Liberian literature. So we're working on that and we'll be coming to you for support. Continue to support us, advertise with us, and let us keep this program going. Until then, from all of us here at Focus on Liberia, my producer, we also have our guest relations manager. We say thank you so much for joining us. Before you leave, we're going to entertain you with a crew music. So don't go away until you listen to all of it.
Oh, You know, come and see at ya, Munombo, Yeno Mona, Yeno Mona, Yeno Mona, Mighty Sister, Sister, Mone, Yeno Mona, Yeno Mona. Despacito, the way you know now. From G to your wedgie, you don't know where. Pretty where you be. Oh, woman, we're not there when oh, now we want. Oh, you too, yeah, mother, yeah, no mother, yeah, no mother. Mighty sister, just your name, yeah, no mother, yeah, no mother. Siete asno sienyo, oh mona kuyo, ni potrini anesroja, ni kwinyo, waurenyo, yemu wesie, yeswa mona wimo, omujetu, yemodiko, yeno mona. Mighty sister, just your name, no mona, no mona. Despacito, dive, no mona, no mona, no mona. Mighty sister, just your name, no mona.